When Highland Village started, it was 2 square miles. When you look at where we are today, and you think about where we started, this was all fields. This was a dairy farm. The Doubletree was actually a dairy farm. In 50 years, look how we have changed from a rural place to really a really nice city. People just don't, if you just move here, you just don't realize what we were.
Highland Village back in those days was much more of a country type development or a lake type development than what it is now. Well, my dad bought one of the first lots and built the first new home in Highland Village in 1957 to 58 in the Clearwater Estates development. It was a little bit of the Wild Wild West out here at the time. It was an interesting place. You could ride your go-karts, your mini bikes and motorcycles, and wasn't any way to get into trouble because there was no police officers out here.
Robert Duvall, and I believe his name was Gene Smith, was a builder on parts of over by the lake. And they decided they wanted to become incorporated because Louisville was growing and taking in extra land, and they didn't want to be a part of that because they, at that time, thought they were so far out from Louisville that they would just get a policeman drive through maybe once a month. And then they had to decide what did they want to name their little village. Gene Smith's wife, I think, whose name was Jane Smith, said, well, she wanted it to be classy. So they decided they wanted it to be Highland something. Well, there was a Highland Lake, Texas. There was a Highland, Texas.
Everybody up here wanted to call it Highland Park, but they couldn't, so they called it Highland Village instead.
Because they were just 2 square miles, and so they wanted to be just a little village. So that's how they decided on the name of Highland Village.
Oh, well, my daughter, Chris, wanted to have a horse. We lived in Brookhaven Club Drive, and we sold our house and built a home off of Selmeyer Lane, which was a dirt road, and I think they call it the little street back in the red something now. My white ranch house is still there. It was on 11 acres. And we built a barn, and we moved in Highland Village.
We went from being really the only full-time builder out here to there being numerous.
We built the first real estate firm here, which was the Century 21 Dollhouse. It was very charming. When I was in real estate, one of the first things I'd show people was the little hills and valleys of Highland Village, because it was so different than where they had ever come from. They came from all over the world here. It's just easygoing, honest people. It was nothing like I had ever seen in Toledo.
I guess the first police officer we got was in the late 60s, but he only lasted about 2 weeks. And for whatever reason, the council decided to let him go and hire Fred Chance, and Fred became the police chief up here.
Fred Chance, the chief of police, was a delightful man. You know, he used to own the Fred's Pickalock over here, which he's retired now. But my son was 14 and had one of those dirt bikes and was speeding down the road, going over the railroad tracks, and they picked him up. And instead of throwing him in jail, which he should have been thrown in jail, he made him do rock work for 6 days.
And, you know, Fred tried to do the right thing. He gave me the first ticket in Highland Village for speeding, and I refused to ever pay it because his radar gun wasn't registered with the FCC. So I guess I still have an outstanding warrant in Highland Village, but in 1971, I believe it was, Highland Village bought a 1958 pump truck for the fire department for I think $800.
We all took money up, and everyone put in, I think, $50 that we all put in and bought a used fire truck. And it was kept at the Doubletree / Single Tree.
They decided they needed a barn to keep it in, and Papa Duval said that they could build a temporary barn over on his property. And I was the only body really building any number of houses out here, so they came to me one Friday afternoon, the volunteer fire department did, and said, hey, we need to get some scrap lumber off your jobs. And I said, well, no problem. Just go take what you want this weekend, any of the scrap stuff you can have. And I thought, well, this is going to cost me, but I had no idea. They stripped my jobs. They took all the lumber off of every job. And by the next weekend, we had a built barn for the fire department. Put this truck in.
And the story is that the first time there was a fire, that Bob Duval jumped in the fire engine, took down Highland Village Road, the curve where we've just finished it down there, where the boathouses are. He didn't make the curve. The fire truck ended up in the water.
So other volunteers that were behind him in pickups had to get them out of the truck, and then they all went up there with fire extinguishers and put out this little fire that was in the corner up there. But yeah, that's, we were kind of a comedy show at that point in time.
When we moved to Highland Village, it was in the summer of 1976, and our oldest daughter, Emily, was 10 days old when we bought this house. It was completely different than it is now because it was so tiny. When the real estate agent told us he was going to bring us to see a house, we didn't even know Highland Village was a town. We thought we were buying in Louisville.
The little streets they didn't have sewers back in there. They were little dirt roads.
Moved to Highland Village in June of 1977, and it was a very rural area. I live on Selmar, and you couldn't get on the 407 from Selmar. There probably wasn't more than maybe 500 to 600 homes at that time.
This was about the only area that was built in at all. Village Estates across the way was there with some homes, but it was very limited. And then the original area, which was the lakefront community where people commuted, down around Clearwater and Lakeland and in that area.
So we moved here to get to the country, but recently the country's come to us. So
There were probably 2,000 people max here at the time. And I've laughingly said that counts dog, cats, and pregnant women twice, and all the children.
Chief Fred Chance knocked on my door one afternoon, and he said, "You're Ron Hurst." I said, "Yeah, I'm Ron Hurst." He said, "You're a lawyer, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I'm a lawyer." He said, "We need a judge." I said, "Do you want to be the judge?" I said, "Well, what's the judge have to do?" He says, "Well, I don't know."
There was nothing out here. McGee was a dirt road. Morris was barely 2 lanes. We were pretty isolated. I know it sounds strange to say we were isolated even from Louisville, but there was a fair amount of undeveloped territory between Louisville. Flower Mound was really undeveloped, and so our neighborhoods were a primary source of social interaction. We boated together, we went to the lake together, we partied together, and the neighborhood was pretty tight, even though there were very few houses on the street. We were all very good friends.
There wasn't a lot of things going on in the city then. Everything was held. If there was something like that, it was always held at the DoubleTree.
I think one of the first people I met here was Papa Duval, who was nosy enough to come up and see who we were and what we were doing. And
Papa Duval has always there with his horse. He was always, he liked to show his horse, Trouble, how it would bend down, because Papa was a little man. And the horse, he would train it so he could bend down and he could get on the saddle up on the horse real easy. So
He was just a nice person in the community. And that was the city park, was the DoubleTree Ranch, which was also where the city council met and the parties happened.
DoubleTree was called DoubleTree and Singletree, and that was because there was 2 trees at one spot and 1 tree at the other. And the trailer that was it was a mobile trailer, and that was the city hall.
Robert Duvall was famous for catching fish and having fish fries and calling the community together for fish fries on Friday evening. And so word would go out and we would all bring a dish and go to Doubletree Ranch and have fried fish and mingle and meet people that we didn't know, and became, you know, good friends with a lot of them.
We used the single tree. We rented stables there from Papa Duval. And so we would get a permit. I would go there and give Bob Duval $25. He'd put a set of plans, throw them up in the attic, and there we're there.
That was why it became such a major part of everybody's life, because you just mentioned going to the Doubletree for a luncheon, or you went for a dance or a wedding or whatever. So in fact, one of our daughters had a reception at the Doubletree Ranch when she married, so that was the place to be.
We went to our first fireman's ball, which was a sweetheart ball, by the way.
And that was to raise money to buy our first ambulance, whether we didn't even have an ambulance. The fire department was entirely volunteer.
And oh, it was, you had to have reservations to get at the Doubletree because it was packed house all the time.
They held 4 balls a year, and the one that we went to was the Valentine's dance. And 2 neighbors got together to make sure that Bill and I got there. One neighbor bought tickets for us, and another neighbor's daughter babysat our then very, very young son. He was a toddler. So we went to our very first dance 2 months after we bought this, well, a month and a half after we bought this house, after we moved in. So very, very close-knit. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody helped everybody. We loved it. We loved living. I still love living here. I love this town.
I moved in January of 1980. At that point in time, there were only about 2,000 or so people in Highland Village. And it was really pretty sleepy, and people were just starting to become aware of it.
It was considerably smaller and more of a smaller community because Highland Shores and nothing west had been developed.
As with everything, as growth comes new people, and more people, you know, started coming in.
A few years later, Montclair was built, and then Highland Shores was coming online in '84.
They started bringing in people from all over the country that were basically being transferred in by all the big companies. And it brought us a melting pot of people from everywhere.
And that's really when Highland Village started to become exciting. And that's probably not exactly the word everyone would use back then.
Then all of a sudden, Highland Shores started developing, and they developed that first little section, like maybe 1 street in, all along, you know, a short distance. Say, well, those are nice houses, so okay. But they just kept building and building and building, and we had no control over the kind of streets they were putting in, the water requirements, because we were on state law at that time. We were not home rule.
The sewers were often run over and into the lake. The local high school for homecoming would have the band march down one of the local towns, but they got to the point to where they wouldn't let anyone walk down, the band walk down Highland Village Road because there were too many potholes.
Well, as one would figure out, you go from a little village of 2,100, and as you start growing, more people are driving on the road, so the roads start to deteriorate. More people are demanding water, and we only had 1 well. It basically came about, we were, you know, running by our shoestrings at the time, and any more growth, because even without that additional growth, we were already too much. I mean, I go out in the morning and I look at the water tower, and the thing will be, I said, oh, we're empty. Sure enough, we were, and had to tell people to shut their water off, don't turn it on, and give the tank time to fill up.
And people were scooping the back of their toilet with their coffee cups in order to get enough water to make coffee in the morning.
When we ran out of water, the citizens changed their demeanor greatly. They got very irate. I would get calls along with everybody else on the council, 3 o'clock in the morning, with a narrative something like, hey, I'm in a shower and I'm all lathered up, I don't have any water. My response is, well, neither do I, sir. Otherwise, I invite you over here to finish. The Upper Trinity District was in the talking stage. Hey, do we want to do this? We said, yeah, we want to do it. We don't have any water. Louisville didn't want to do it. Palmer didn't want to do it. So it got in the talking stage for quite a while until we felt strongly about it. And that was one of the reasons Austin Adams had to step down off the council, because he was our representative on the Trinity Water District.
But through a lot of effort of people taking on some projects, I know I took on helping to form the Upper Trinity Regional Water District, and Highland Village has always been an integral part of that, and we have a stable water supply and good quality wastewater treatment.
One of the things that Highland Village did so well is they committed to the right amount of water. You know, some cities, they buy this much, but they only use this much all the time, but they need that much to get the irrigation during the summer. Highland Village, on the other hand, committed to this much. They use this much all the time. So they only pay for what they use. And that is such a economical, smart thing for them to do.
That was also the time when the center down here, the Buddy Sharp Center, went in 1984.
Up until then, it had been pretty well thought that there would be no commercial activity in Highland Village, that we would be strictly a bedroom community.
I was driving by on 407 with my wife and my kid, and my wife commented as we drove by Highland Village Road intersection with 407 that somebody ought to buy that corner and build a shopping center. Here we were driving all the way into Louisville for a hamburger, you know, basically.
Vince Gaylor designed Village Creek for Buddy Sharp and selected all the colors for Village Creek and made it, he wanted it to be more like a little Highland Park shopping center. And
that's the way that project got designed, basically. Everybody decided they wanted a look of a house, or large houses up there, and a campus setting, and through numerous P&Z meetings and numerous council meetings that one of them I brought, the previous council meeting lasted until 3 o'clock in the morning, and so I just brought my bedroll to the next council meeting and rolled it out.
By 1985, that year was really one with a lot of controversy, and I decided that I shouldn't be complaining without offering to be a part of the solution. And so I ran for council that first time in 1985, and it was quite a campaign. It had its own controversies, but the election went smoothly, and I was elected to the council. And that was under the old mayor and 5 members of council format. In that election also, we had reached 5,000 people in population, so we had a charter vote, whether we wanted to become a home rule city or not.
And we decided that we would file for home rule and make our own ordinance and put stiffer rules down so the builders couldn't come in with shoddy streets. If they're going to build on a street that was dilapidated, would require them to repair it.
And so the next year then followed with a charter being drafted and then put before the citizens in '86. And with that then we expanded to the current 7-member council, including a mayor.
And that was the time when the city decided, well, some of the council members decided that we needed to go wet. And as you know, in Texas, every community has to vote itself wet. It's done community by community.
When the election to go wet came up, it was a big controversy, as you would well imagine there would be, with very strong pros, very strong cons as to whether it was needed, what it was going to look like.
All of a sudden, on the council agenda is this deal to vote on liquor by the drink in Highland Village and liquor sales. And the first time it came up, it passed.
But the pros were also very much in favor of it in terms of what it could do for us for restaurants and the ability to have nice restaurants and to have be able to get a drink at a restaurant, not as a bar situation, but as a restaurant.
For them to pass liquor by the drink and liquor sales just blew me away. And it made a difference in Highland Village. I mean, at the time you had to drive all the way to Walnut Hill Lane on 35 to buy liquor, or all the way up into Lake Dallas. Eventually it got into Lake Dallas. So.
The Sesquicentennial was in 1986, and it's in case people don't know, it's a 150-year celebration of the independence of Texas as a state. And so that would be 1836 is when Texas won its independence as a state.
In 1985, the state knew that the state's 150th birthday was coming, so they put out the information to all the communities to be involved.
As a history major, I was very interested in that, and the city of Louisville had already begun their plans to celebrate the Sesquicentennial. So as I became involved in some of the things that they were doing, and I mentioned it to our mayor, Bill Thorne was on council, and Art Newman was the mayor, and they all were in agreement that we needed to be doing something too.
We were also told by the state that we needed to research our history. Well, Highland Village was a baby community at that time. It was in its infancy. We hadn't even reached our 25th birthday yet.
There was certainly the wagon train stopped and camped here as it did on the Butterfield stage line. But even other than that, we had a whole year of activities.
We had $0 to do anything with, so one of our first priorities, besides being officially recognized and doing the things we needed to do as a Sesquicentennial city with the state, was to find some way to raise some funds to be able to do some things. And so our first event evolved a hot air balloon festival. And that was the first hot air balloon thing that happened here in the city. And we had it at what is now Kroger. That was all open land. The city was so kind. The city has always been so helpful with events and things. They offered to have them come mow the field for us because it was just Johnson grass. And it had been nothing but a pasture for many, many, many years. People came out, they were sitting around on their blankets and their pallets and their lawn chairs. We heard later that there was an influx of people to the emergency room at the Louisville Hospital. Chiggers were also there in big attendance, and people that were not from this area didn't recognize that they were eaten up with chiggers and were at the emergency room. Couldn't believe that they thought they had wild rash, and it was chiggers. We had had an unexpected sacrifice of people to the chiggers at that field.
The Balloon Fest, of course, drew a lot of people to Highland Village and later became a signature event that is still going on, and I'm so proud to be a part of the lines that started this.
Christine, my daughter, well, she was into horses, and her stepson Stephen, who was Tom's boy, which lived with us, they all lived together, was into horses too. He managed Swanee Hunt's 17,000-acre ranch in Colorado, and when the Sesquicentennial came about and was offered, they immediately went out and found 2 pairs of mules, matching pair of mules to buy, and a wagon. To go into this parade, that's what we bought them for. And we built a little barn next to Remax, and we called them Ree and Max.
Came here on June the 27th, and it continued its route, kind of circumventing, because it was always on back roads. And it ended up in the Fort Worth Stockyards on July the 4th. So it was a 6-month trip from January the 2nd to July the 4th.
But to me, one of the exciting things was Papa Duval. We asked him to ride in that lead wagon. And he was spry enough to be able to crawl up into that wagon and ride in and commented. He said, "This is about the same way I came to this part of the country back when I when I came here, so he remembered coming here in a covered wagon. Joe Gamble was our city manager at the time. He was also familiar with horses, and he had a gang, as it were, that rode out and as outlaws and waylaid the wagon train to bring them over to sight. So our city manager actually led a gang of outlaws to pull the wagon train over.
When the wagon train would stop in the various communities, these communities knew when they were coming and knew what day and what time of the day. And they were primarily being fed beans and barbecue, almost every, because it's cheap and it's easy to make a lot of it. We decided that we were not going to do beans and barbecue. This was the year that Texas Hamburger opened.
They came on site and prepared hot hamburgers, French fries for all the people that came. The people, we fed the wagon train for free.
What we did was we sold tickets to the residents of Highland Village. It said, we called it Have Lunch with a Wagoneer. For $5, you bought lunch for a Wagoneer. They did not have to pay for their meal, which most communities made them pay for their beans and barbecue. All of the wagon train pulled off right there at Briar Hill Boulevard and 407. And it was a huge event. We had people in town, all the dignitaries, everybody was there.
That was a big deal when that wagon train went around the city. And we have that wonderful marker to show that we were a participant.
Additionally, we had special engraved knives and pistols that were done by a Highland Village resident. So a lot of people had those as souvenirs of the Texas Sesquicentennial. And the knife, though, actually had a specific engraving on it that was special and unique to Highland Village. So that was something special that came out of that period of time, which coincidentally was right about the same time as our 25th anniversary for Highland Village itself. It was a fun time.
And I started part-time in July of 1988 and went full-time September 1st of that year.
When I went on the council, interesting part, I think there was probably 10 employees in Highland Village.
When you compared us to cities around us like Flower Mound and Louisville and maybe the Colony or different ones that we always seem to be compared to, we were quite a bit smaller, and so consequently we all wore lots of hats. I mean, everybody worked together to accomplish a whole lot with a few people. And I think in a lot of ways we've done that through the years. We're still not as big a staff as area cities, but we get a lot done with great results.
I started to work for Highland Village Police Department in the late 80s. Actually, when I first drove up to the City Hall, I saw that the community was very nice, looked great. I drove around and it looked like a place I'd like to work. But the building that City Hall was in was not very nice at the time. It was one of the older houses, and I kind of had to think twice before I actually walked in and applied.
Actually, my interview was down the road at 948, actually in a double-wide trailer there. And my first day, I really questioned, what did I do?
But I went inside and talked to the chief at the time and the sergeant who was in charge of the hiring, and they were very nice and very personable, and I liked the people there, and decided to go ahead and apply.
I'd never worked in city government, so it was all new to me. And working with, and I was about the only female in the bunch. I mean, all the builders and the contractors and plumbers and electricians that all came in that I worked with, you know, they thought that they could, like one of them brought me flowers one day because he wanted an inspection late on Friday afternoon, and I said, thank you for the flowers, but, you know, I'll see you Monday.
And certainly it was a different environment, a lot more informal than what it is now, but over the years we transitioned to new facilities and a number of added positions. The technologies increased significantly, but it was certainly it's a marked change from what it was back 21 years ago when I started with the city.
And then and I don't know what year they moved to 948, which used to be a hamburger place. And it was a house, and the offices were the bedrooms. It was pretty unique.
We didn't have a jail, and but what we had was basically a wooden bench that had a metal pole strapped to the building, and because we didn't have a jail, we'd bring prisoners in, and they would sit on this wooden bench, and we'd handcuff them to the pole, and that was our makeshift temporary jail before we transported them up to Denton County, and it was a little unusual, but it worked.
The first council meetings that I remember being involved in, of course it was still at the 948 Highland Village Road facility, was a little audio-visual room about maybe 6 by 6, if that large. We had a donated video camera, and we had microphones that worked sometimes and sometimes they didn't. So we run coax cable up in the attic, from that little room to the council chambers and to the dais so we could have sound. But you never knew if it was going to work because the squirrels would get up in the attic and eat the coax. And
We've grown quite a bit. I have seen over 33 years being here, quite a bit of growth. Where the senior center is now was the original firehouse, and next to the firehouse was a city hall for a while, and the original city hall set off to the side up there, which was the old Dairy Queen.
then in about 1994, we moved to a lease space on 407 and Selmeyer Lane, and we stayed there probably till 2000. And I think we moved into this facility in 2000.
We started that when I was on the council in '84, when $24.99, we pushed for $24.99. It took, once we got approval from the state, we want to do this, they said, okay, we'll put it on the thing. And it still is on a 10-year waiting list.
Two of the biggest issues were economic development and the development of the road, FM 2499. And they actually took place in reverse order. The first issue was the road, because without the road, we could not have done the economic development.
And that would have impacted the city dramatically in terms of the look, the shopping availability, our taxes. A lot of things would have been impacted by that. And the decisions about keeping all the development on the outer perimeters as opposed to within the city anywhere. That would have been an impact as well on how the city looks.
So we wanted to take the tax burden off of the citizens and make us competitive with surrounding cities. And the only way to do that was to bring economic development. And the only way to bring economic development was to have a corridor.
So once we got the road cleared to come in, then we moved to economic development.
We needed a vision. One thing we knew for sure was that we did not want it to develop piecemeal.
Over the last 20 years, if you lived in Highland Village and you drove down 407, it was always so pretty seeing those Black Angus cattle laying out there, and all you see is around, you see this big old tree standing out here, and myself and Sue Thompson received a phone call from the property owner out that used to own all this, who was Jimmy Fagan. We sat out in that Winnebago that day, and we sat there for a couple hours, and he told us his vision of a tax base to help his grandchild play at Unity Park, the ability for the ball fields to be taken care of, the trail system to be built. He provided that vision that day, what he wanted to see potentially this land out here happen with it. He turned to me and he kind of gave me a challenge. Mike, how are you going to take this back to council? How are you going to make my vision happen? And I told him, I said, well, Jimmy, your vision and the vision of council are very similar. The council and yourself are wanting to see the growth and development for the amenities for the community. If your vision is for a shopping center, something to happen here, I think council will embrace that. Now the job is, how do we get there?
The retail and economic development on the west side of Highland Village was envisioned as a cohesive development, a complementary development with the Opus on one side and the shops on the other side. And to sustain that was going to require a wide variety of retail options. And so the previous councils and the staff worked hard to bring in what they felt like was complementary develop on both sides there. And I think the proof is there now. As
the city was developing, what I learned very quickly was that the citizens were very passionate about their views on Highland Village and the vision that they all had for it.
Well, Walmart initially wasn't wanted not only by the residents, it wasn't wanted by the city council either. But we knew that we had to do something different if Highland Village was going to be able to survive in the future.
The developers at the very beginning said, no, we don't build trails. Retailers don't build trails and sidewalks and connectivity for retail. And we said, well, for Highland Village, you will build trails. You will build it to what we want, or it's not going to happen.
They met all of our standards. They met all of our conditions for being here. And I think it's paid off handsomely for them, and it's also paid off handsomely for the city.
And it's one that myself, I'm extremely proud of, and I feel the community today is very proud of what Walmart is in Highland Village, Texas. It's second to none.
The shops now is a regionally known center, a destination place where people come for sometimes 20 or more miles to enjoy, relax, shop, go to the movies, spend time with their family. It's all right there.
The past mayors and councils have worked hard to bring a quality development to our city.
To envision that we would have the shops, the district, all these things that are coming online, I couldn't have even imagined. There were horses being pastured where Buddy Sharp's development is, where the grotto is. That was horses running there. Across the street where the Kroger is were cows.
When I started with the fire department, we were in a temporary building, fairly small, over at 948. Just a handful of volunteers that were primarily Highland Village residents. And I came from Irving. I lived in Irving at the time, and I was kind of the moving forward, they were having trouble getting volunteers from just the city residents, so they started reaching out outside the city limits. And so we just had a handful of volunteers in an old building, and that would eventually, be too small for us.
There have been several factors that have contributed to us being the safest city over the past 10 years. One of which has been our citizens. They're very active in the community, and they keep watch from each other. They watch over their neighbors, and they report things to us. Also, of course, our officers are very proactive in the community, and we look to prevent crime rather than have to react to it later.
Okay, we moved new facility May 1st, 2008. State of the art. We're able to do anything we need to out of here. Now we've got state of the art equipment, ambulances, fire trucks, brush trucks. The equipment that we use has improved dramatically. We're not using used tools from somebody else or hand-me-downs. We're able to keep up with the trend and the technology and the things that we can do. It really helps our job.
Establish policies to maintain certain reserve balances. We look to a big emphasis was staffing, that we needed to add positions to provide the services needed, but we had to be very mindful of doing that as we could afford that. So we had to be very patient.
We did it with first of economic development, a planned, systematic way of adding individuals, adding firefighters, adding staff without impacting our ad valorem tax rate.
And we're fortunate that we have a superior demographic profile here, as well as vibrant local economy. But there's a lot of things we did in previous years that have really positioned us to be where we're at now.
Well, in 2005, the citizens approved the 4B sales tax revenue, and my first involvement in the city was serving on the Community Development Corporation board. This was the board that looked at the trail system and the soccer complex and how to plan that and fund it appropriately.
We did that also with the approval of the 4B sales tax in 2005 that provides a half-cent sales tax dedicated to trail development and soccer facilities are the two uses for that. But that's helped us to build a trail system that is advancing quite rapidly, and we have a dedicated funding source to achieve that.
And Highland Village is a thriving, healthy community, and I really do give credit to our leadership, both the paid staff as well as the volunteer council and mayors that we've had in the past. We've had some really good leadership in this city.
It was some good times, and my kids thoroughly enjoyed it. They all got through school, and it was a good place to raise a family. It still is a good place to raise a family. I've been very pleased to have been a part of this community for all these years.
Well, the only thing I can say about Highland Village is that if you're lucky, you're living here. And if you're lucky, you've worked here.
And now we can all sit back and enjoy the fruits of the labor. There's still things to be done, but I think all in all, it goes back to saying that we as a city have it all. And I don't just mean that in the tangible things, I mean that in the people that we have and at the city level and our schools and all the other entities that make up Highland Village.
We're working to encourage our residents and the shopper of the region to choose Highland Village.
That a lot of thought, a lot of caring by a lot of people went into building this city, what it is today. And thank God they had the foresight to not be afraid of growth.
I'd just like to say that I think that this is the very, very best community in Denton County to live in. Yes, it's changed in the years we've been here. I think the changes have primarily been for the better. We have grown in a very positive, calculated, planned way. I love this town, and I work hard for this town. I can't think of any place I'd rather live.
The things to look forward to would be, can't wait to see what happens at Doubletree Park when that's developed. I know there are grand and glorious plans for that, and there's 36 acres there, so that will be exciting to see.
The Doubletree Ranch has been an integral part of the city's history from its inception in 1963. For so long it was a social meeting place where people from the neighborhood would gather for different events, and over time it continued to be that type of meeting place. And when the opportunity presented itself for the city to acquire that property and to make it something special, a centerpiece on the eastern side of the city, it was a difficult opportunity to pass up due to a lot of hard work by members of the city staff and our council. That came together, and we were very proud that we took advantage of that opportunity.
The future for Highland Village and economic development is one sense way very exciting and a challenging opportunity.
I think that's exciting. The number of shops that are being planned at the district, all of those things that are coming online.
Long term, 10 years out, what is the future of economic development? It's our east side, Selmeyer, redevelopment, the opportunities down there. We still have some infill that's going to be some unique opportunities. I think the opportunities in there of the redevelopment of our older residential areas. I think there's some real opportunities to grasp a character and a uniqueness that really makes us shine in Denton County and North Texas. So I think there's as big and as grand as what we've done here at this intersection. I think we could almost duplicate it in other areas of the community, but just on a different format.
Happy birthday, Highland Village. Glad to see you made it.
Happy birthday, Highland Village.
Happy birthday, Highland Village. 50 years. Who knew?
Happy 50th Highland Village. Gig 'em.
Happy anniversary, Highland Village.
Happy birthday, Highland Village.
Happy birthday, Highland Village, and many more.
Happy anniversary, Highland Village.
Oh, happy birthday, Highland Village, 50 years.
Highland Village, happy 50th anniversary. It's been a great time.
Happy birthday, Highland Village.
If you ever want to come by and say hello to me, I always have a cup of hot tea for you.
Happy birthday, Highland Village. It is amazing to think that the city is 50 years old.
Happy birthday, Highland Village. I'm so glad to have been a part of Highland Village almost for the last 50 years. So here's looking forward to another 50 years and great times ahead. Happy birthday.
Dude, go.
It's your turn.
No, go.
What am I supposed to say?
It's the 50th anniversary.
Oh, happy 50th anniversary, Highland Village.
And may your next 50 be happy, happy, happy.
Is that good enough for you?
Well, yeah.
Okay, good.
God.